Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stock Market Today. It's Coram and Ed Carson here with a breakdown of the action in today's session, Tuesday, March 5th, where we did see a tough day for stocks, but at least we closed off lows. And as always, there's some interesting stocks to take a look at, and we still have more key earnings out.
Yeah, more key earnings. We have Jerome Powell tomorrow. I want to take a look at three stocks: Duolingo, PNC Financial, and Lennar.
Okay, well, we'll get to those stocks and thoughts. But first, let's take a look at the major indexes. So the Nasdaq today down less than 1.7%. We had the S&P 500 today down about 1% by sessions close. Same for the Dow, that 0 DJIA, and then the Russell 2000 down a little less than 1.1%. Here's 0 RUS to show that. But let's start with the Nasdaq with our analysis here today, Ed. I mean, heading into today's session, we were talking about how the indexes, once again, we're starting to get extended. I love that analogy that you keep using about racing to the next stoplight. And it seems like that's what's happened. But this time, I don't know, maybe a wreck at the intersection or something, potentially, some close calls there, and some car wrecks of charts underneath the surface.
Yeah, I mean, we came down, the NASDAQ doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's given up the gains from Thursday, Friday. So we had cleared this sort of 3-week area or so. And, you know, we've given those and more back. But it found support of the 21-day line. There's more damage underneath the surface because we have a situation where a handful of names like NVIDIA and some of those AI chip names, they held on to all their gains. They, like NVIDIA, and ended up going higher, and a lot of other names were just okay. You know, we didn't really lose anything. But software, and there's certain names that didn't just give up the last couple of days, they really gave it gains. And Microsoft looks a lot better than a lot of other names, and even that. So these are big names in IGV, which we'll look at, but there's other names that maybe aren't as big a names. So we'll see how that goes. There's been some negative news there, but so we'll have to see. I mean, we found support here every time, but you can't necessarily count on that. At some point, it's going to drop. Now, maybe it just drops to the 50-day line at some point. Doesn't mean it's going to happen this time, but at some point it will. Or at some point, it's not just going to stop at the 50. It's going to keep on going. And so you have to be thinking about what your portfolio is, especially if you're in big volatile names. I mean, there was names, okay, the Nasdaq's down 1.65. There's some quality names out there that were down 7-8% today. You can imagine what would have happened if the Nasdaq ended up falling 7, 8, 9% from here.
Right. So that 21-day line remains key. So we'll keep an eye on that level. But the power trend, even if we get a close below the 21-day line, the power trend is going to continue until a couple of other triggers happen. And I do think if that is the case, whenever it does happen, finding support at the 50-day or 10-week line is something that we'd really want to see. And if we're looking at precedents like 2003 in the Nasdaq, we're not going to pull it up here, but feel free to do that on your own. You can see in that power trend, we had a number of pullbacks to and around the 50-day line. So we'll have to see, is this a more significant change in trend? Is this the pause that we've finally been waiting for? Because I think investors, honestly, Ed, have been spoiled since early November. If we do have a down week this week, it would be only the 3rd week down out of the last 19. So
yeah, not much. You're right.
Yeah, so it seems like we're kind of due for a pause here to me.
Yeah, we certainly could be, but we could have argued that weeks ago. I mean,
Right.
I think we've all been looking for that, and not just a pause, but like a real pause of several weeks. I mean, even beyond what January or anything, but something longer hasn't happened yet. Doesn't mean it has to happen, but yeah,
Right.
we certainly could be in for it.
We just got to be ready for it, ready for the possibility instead of just kicking back and expecting, you know, the same ratio of up weeks to down weeks to continue at the pace that it has. So a little bit of a reality check or just, you know, anticipation for that potential there. Let's take a look at the S&P 500, Ed. We're still above some key levels on this chart.
Yeah, and there's some other areas that are doing pretty well beyond tech. It really, a lot of it was tech, and so this is still looking pretty good. Hey, yesterday it hit a record high. This one really didn't pause much of all, even back a couple of weeks ago when the Nasdaq didn't have much of a, just it was a very much smaller, so looking very strong.
And above the 21-day and that 5,000 level. And blue chips, how did they fare today? Well, we did get a close below the 21-day line here for the Dow, something that hasn't happened in a while, but still above that 50-day.
Honestly, you might have expected to be worse because Apple and Microsoft were down 3% today. But banks are doing well. There's a lot of areas that are doing well, but yeah, definitely. Yeah, so the Dow lagging, that obviously has lagged in general, but isn't doing too badly all in all.
Okay, and let's take a look at the Russell 2000 0 RUS. We've been talking about that critical level around not only 2000, which we are above, but the high from late last year. And no surprise, Ed, at least in the short term, to see a little bit of resistance there.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the market falling off. I mean, this honestly, usually small caps outpace to the downside or upside, and so that actually outperformed in that regard. There's probably a lot of banks and maybe some energy names, home builders. I mean, some names in there that are doing better outside of those mega cap techs.
Okay, next on our
And you're
list,
on mute.
am I still on mute?
Nope, no.
All right. You are keeping me ready and dealing with a dog here. All right, let's go to IGV now. This is the software sector. Jojo's quite concerned about the damage in the software sector today, Ed. What do you think?
Well, it may not be as bad. There was some. We've had a number of sell-offs in there. The last time we fell below the 50-day line, that was when Palo Alto had negative earnings. A few days later, we had Snowflake. Then today, GitLab sold off. So I think there was some nervousness about some of these software names, and we were coming into Powell and we're coming into CrowdStrike, which ended up doing pretty well. But CrowdStrike did not have a good day, but as you can see, after hours, really strong. So there might be a bounce back. So we'll see how that goes. But you didn't know. You didn't know. There's been a lot of negative earnings. So you can't just say, well, everything's fine. And if this bounces back and IGV bounces back, everybody go, well, in hindsight, that was great. Why was anybody worried? It's like we fell through the 50-day line. A lot of quality names. I mean, we're selling off really hard today. And if this had been down 17% for CrowdStrike, could have been pretty ugly in the software space, especially given all the other losses recently.
Absolutely. So this is going to be a group to keep tabs on tomorrow. Can we see CrowdStrike like what NVIDIA did for the broad market? Can we see CrowdStrike lift the software sector with its strong report? We'll have to see. Okay, next on the list, let's take a look. Speaking of chips, let's go to SMH here, Ed. Definitely a very different look here between chips and software.
Yeah, a lot better. I mean, look, NVIDIA is the #1 stock in there, and I think AMD and Taiwan Semi held on to the bulk of these gains. And so you look here, it's like, yeah, these kind of pullbacks, whatever, they're no big deal at all. I mean, this is not an issue. We had these huge gains and really didn't give up much at all. So definitely within the tech space, not everything is equal.
Okay, and let's take a look at Bitcoin because the notable news here, we got a new all-time high intraday for the cryptocurrency, but a big reversal to say the least here today, Ed.
Big reversal, got down to, well, I think below 60,000 at one point. So it got over 69,000, plunged. It's back around 63,000. I mean, it's not a surprise. Look at those huge gains. I mean, there's just been enormous. And so anybody who's gotten part of that, but this is why we talk about not getting extended, because you could have been, there were places maybe to get into this, to the Bitcoin there, or even when it got up to the recent highs there, you could argue. But where it was today, this is why, just very extended. It could have worked. I mean, yesterday it worked, but at some point these things, and you can take enormous losses overnight, even when it's a really strong stock or play.
Absolutely. I agree. Really need to be careful there. And you mentioned strength in financial. So let's take a look at some financial ETFs. Here's the Spider S&P Bank ETF, KBE. And I say about performance up 3%.
Yeah, all of a sudden the banks have started to look very strong. A number of them had quietly set up, and this is why you need to work on your watch lists. Make sure that you're not ignoring these other sectors. And so this might be a place that you say, like, I want to shift out of tech a little bit, maybe, either reduce exposure overall or maybe a little bit of diversity with some bank names.
Okay. And let's now go to KRE. This is the regional bank ETF. Even stronger at 4%. Still needs to get back above that 50-day line. That would be great. And then let's take a look at XHBED home builders today, down 1.1%, but a really nice move in recent weeks.
Yeah, and again, holding on to the bulk of their recent gains, falling treasury yields, definitely helping on that front.
Okay, well, let's take a look at some notable stocks. Here's Duolingo, down 6.1% by the end of the day, erasing some of its losses after finding support at the 50-day line and that 200 price level. We saw an earnings gap up, but it almost came in to fill that entire gap, Ed. If this does go on to form a handle, would it be too big and messy in your view?
Looks pretty messy. I mean, it might work out. It'd be great if it could maybe come back and quietly do that and like take some time.
Mhm.
One reason I wanted to look at this is we've seen recently, for a long time, it seemed like all the gap ups were working. Like they'd gap up and maybe they'd pause, maybe not, or they'd just keep on running. But either way, you were generally they would keep, you would generally be paying off. But now we're seeing more gap ups struggle. And this was sort of a surprise because Duolingo had its earnings. So when you were worried about, oh, and what's CrowdStrike going to do? But Duolingo already had its earnings. It wasn't going to, you shouldn't have been that worried about Duolingo, but you could see how there was that selling off of that, the big gain. This would have been tough. I mean, I understand if it bounced off there and you said at the end of the day, I'm glad I held on. But if you bought that gap up, you were down a lot. I mean, that was down quite a bit. Even if you bought it near the very low of that day, you were down 10+%. So that's a troubling. We saw a lot of damage. Great to see support here. Maybe you can, set up again, but some wild action here.
Yeah, when investors do buy these earnings gaps, we like to buy as close to the open as possible and lean on those intraday charts. But I think also a lot of us were saying, look at it over the next couple of days. Can it hold on to this move? Can it tighten up? Can it hold the gap up day low? And today it's not. So maybe this needs a little bit more time to set up, as you mentioned, Ed. Okay, let's go to PNC in the financial sector. It got back above the 50-day line yesterday and added to the gains today.
Yeah, there was a lot of banks, especially super regionals, a lot of quality names in this sector setting up. This is sort of classic. It had sort of bottomed late last year when the market did, had its prior uptrend, and now is setting up a base. And so moving out from there, sort of had that. It was actionable yesterday, still actionable from the 50-day line. It would be actionable from the traditional buy point. Wouldn't be too far above that. Nice volume we've seen, some above average volume in 3 of these days, especially yesterday. So nice to see that, and a lot of names in this group. I know what the group is 77, but you've got to feel this one's going to be coming up the list the way this has outperformed the last few days. I know the RS line's been sort of weak, but this will sort of be a chance here, for a lot of these names. So that would be a Fifth Third. We added to leaderboard yesterday. But the leaderboard team added it to the leaderboard. So there's a lot of things. Key Corp. There's, the super regionals. A lot of names are breaking out of bases. It's really surprising given that there was New York Community Bank, which is a regional bank, not super regional, but that continues to have just concerns. And it's interesting how regional bank stocks have shrugged that off, really. And it's like that. There was, I think, concern. Oh boy, this is going to knock these names off. But for now, people just seem to think this is pretty specific, and the bank stocks, the economy seems to be doing all right. This is a positive sign about the economy, about credit and other things that for these to be coming along.
Yeah, definitely an area to watch. All right, let's wrap things up with a look at Lennar. It's hanging out in a buy zone after a solid week last week at 4.1%, reversing lower by a little bit here today, but again, still in a buy zone, Ed.
Yeah, and the volume was a little light. The last couple of days have been a pullback after some decent volume on that move. There's sort of the housing is sort of a turnaround. A lot of the whole construction, there's a lot of names you're looking at. I was looking at this one because it's in a buy zone. Earnings are coming in next week, so there's not a whole lot of time for movement if you're thinking about a new position. You certainly could buy it, but a decision would be coming in, and somehow some home builders have not done well on earnings. While the group has done well, you can't just say, well, they're all going to go up or down together. Well, except when there's earnings, you never know how that'll turn out.
Right. And speaking of, let's just circle back to CrowdStrike before we go. It's still up about 16% after hours on that news on earnings, with bottom line beating and strong full year guidance, it looks like, Ed.
Yeah, so looks like a really positive report. That could be really a boon. Just quickly, base and box, not as big, but it's just nice to see friends, not friends, but like they're also big movers after hours. So it's like maybe, like after some sell-offs in software, we're finally getting some, we're getting some nice positive results today. So that's encouraging for that sector for tomorrow.
Definitely encouraging. All right, Ed, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in. That is it from us for today. And we'll be back with more tomorrow morning on IBD Live. And we hope you join us, investors.com/IBD Live, for all the details there. We will see you there. And then we'll also see you right back here tomorrow after the close.